The recruitment officer looked me dead in the eye and said something that would haunt me for the next 4 years. But before I tell you what he said, you need to understand how I ended up in that chair, trembling like a leaf, with my father's voice still echoing in my head from 3 days earlier. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Michael Patterson, and growing up in Bakersfield, California, I lived in the shadow of my older brother John. Not literally, though at 6'2" he certainly cast a long one, but in every way that mattered to my father, Derek Patterson. Derek wasn't just any dad. He was a Marine Corps veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he wore that identity like a second skin. Our garage was practically a shrine to military memorabilia. The walls were lined with his service ribbons, framed photos of his unit, and a glass case containing his dress blues. Every morning, he'd polish his combat boots while drinking black coffee, even though he worked as a foreman at a construction company and hadn't worn those boots in over a decade. John was Derek's golden child, and it wasn't hard to see why. 18, my brother was already built like a linebacker. Broad shoulders, thick arms, and the kind of natural confidence that made people gravitate toward him. He'd been the star quarterback at Bakersfield High, team captain for 3 years running, and had colleges practically begging him to play for them. But John had other plans. The day after graduation, he walked into the Army Recruitment Center and signed up for an infantry position. I'll never forget the pride in Derek's eyes that day. He actually teared up, something I'd seen maybe twice in my entire life. He called everyone he knew, bragging about how John was carrying on the family tradition, how he was going to serve his country with honor. For weeks afterward, Derek would randomly bring up John's decision in conversations with neighbors, coworkers, anyone who would listen. Then there was me. At 16, I was what you might generously call a late bloomer. I was 5'7" on a good day, weighed maybe 130 pounds soaking wet, and had arms that looked like twigs compared to John's tree trunks. While John was out dominating on the football field, I spent most of my time in my room, nose buried, in books about military history and strategy. I knew more about famous battles and tactical maneuvers than most kids knew about video games, but that kind of knowledge didn't exactly impress anyone at family barbecues. Derek never said it outright, but I could feel his disappointment every time he looked at me. When John would come home from basic training during leave, Derek's whole demeanor would change. His chest would puff out, his voice would get louder, and he'd hang on every word John said about his training. Meanwhile, I'd sit quietly at the dinner table, invisible. The comparison wasn't just physical. John had this natural leadership quality that everyone noticed. Even as kids, he was the one organizing neighborhood games, making decisions, getting other kids to follow his lead. I was more of a thinker, the type who preferred to observe and analyze rather than jump into action. In Derek's world, that made me weak. Things came to a head on a humid Tuesday evening in July. John had just finished his advanced individual training and was home for a brief leave before his first deployment. We were all sitting on the back porch, Derek nursing a beer while John regaled us with stories from Fort Benning. The conversation naturally turned to John's upcoming assignment with the 101st Airborne Division. "I'm proud of you, son," Derek said, clapping John on the shoulder. "You're everything a soldier should be, strong, decisive, fearless. You're going to do great things over there." I was sitting off to the side, as usual, when Derek's gaze shifted to me. His expression changed. Subtly, the pride in his eyes dimming to something that looked almost like pity. "Michael," he said, his voice taking on a different tone, "you need to start thinking about your future. You're going to be a senior next year, and you still don't have any direction. Look at your brother. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, and he's already making something of himself." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "I've been thinking about college, maybe studying military history or—" Derek cut me off with a dismissive wave. College is fine for some people, but it's not going to make a man out of you. You need discipline, structure, something to toughen you up. Maybe you should consider following John's example." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. John looked between Derek and me, sensing the tension but staying quiet. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. "I don't know if the military is right for me," I said quietly. "I mean, I'm not exactly built like John, and—" That's when Derek exploded. "That's exactly the problem," he shouted, standing up, so abruptly that his chair scraped against the concrete. "You're always making excuses, always looking for the easy way out. You think being smart is enough? You think reading books is going to prepare you for the real world?" His face was red now, veins bulging in his neck. John tried to intervene, placing a calming hand on Derek's arm, but our father shook him off. "No, John. He needs to hear this," Derek continued, his voice rising. "You know what your problem is, Michael. You're weak. You're soft. You spend all day with your nose in those books, thinking you're better than everyone else. But when it comes to actually doing something that matters, you fold like a house of cards." The words hit me like physical blows. I sat there, frozen, as Derek continued his tirade. "Your brother is over there preparing to serve his country, to put his life on the line for something bigger than himself. And what are you doing? Sitting around making excuses, acting like you're too good for real work. Well, let me tell you something. You're not too good for anything. You're too weak." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cicadas seemed to have stopped chirping. Derek was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. John looked mortified, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I felt something break inside me at that moment. Not just my heart, but something deeper. My sense of who I was, or who I thought I could become. Derek's words echoed in my head. "You're too weak." Without saying anything, I stood up and walked into the house. I could hear John calling my name behind me, but I didn't stop. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed, staring at the wall. For the next 3 days, Derek and I barely spoke. The house felt like a war zone, with John trying to play peacemaker and Mom walking on eggshells around everyone. Derek would grunt acknowledgments when I passed him in the hallway, but the damage was done. His words had created a chasm between us that felt impossible to bridge. But those 3 days also gave me time to think, really think, about who I was, who I wanted to become, and what I was willing to do to prove Derek wrong. By the 3rd day, I had made a decision that would change everything. That's when I found myself sitting across from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez at the Navy recruitment office in downtown Bakersfield, my hands shaking as I tried to explain why a scrawny 16-year-old wanted to enlist in the most elite fighting force in the world. "Son," Rodriguez said, leaning back in his chair with a skeptical expression. "Do you have any idea what you're asking for? The Navy SEALs aren't just tough, they're the toughest of the tough. Most grown men can't handle what these guys go through in training, and you're telling me you want to try?" I swallowed hard, Derek's voice still ringing in my ears. "Yes, sir. I know it sounds crazy, but I need to do this. I need to prove that I'm not weak." Rodriguez studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. Finally, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Kid, I'm going to be straight with you about something, and I need you to listen carefully." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. "Kid, what I'm about to tell you isn't meant to discourage you, but you need to understand the reality. In my 15 years as a recruiter, I've seen maybe 3 people your size even attempt the SEAL pipeline. 2 of them rang out during Hell Week. The 3rd one made it through Bud-S but washed out during advanced training." His words should have terrified me, but instead, they fueled something deep inside. "What do I need to do?" Rodriguez pulled out a thick manila folder and spread several documents across his desk. First, you can't even officially enlist until you're 17, and that requires parental consent. Second, even if you enlist, there's no guarantee you'll get a shot at SEAL training. You have to earn it through regular Navy service first. I stared at the paperwork, my mind racing. How long would that take? Minimum 2 years of exemplary service before you can even apply for Bud S. That's assuming you can pass the PST, physical screening test. And let's be honest, son, you're nowhere near those numbers right now. Rodriguez pulled out a laminated card with fitness requirements. You need to swim 500 yards in 12 minutes and 30 seconds, do at least 50 push-ups in 2 minutes, 50 sit-ups in 2 minutes, complete 10 pull-ups with no time limit, and run 1.5 miles in 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Those are just the minimums to qualify for training. I looked at the numbers and felt my stomach sink. I could maybe do 10 push-ups on a good day, had never timed myself swimming, and definitely couldn't run 1.5 miles in under 11 minutes, let alone 10:30. I can get there, I said, though my voice betrayed my uncertainty. Rodriguez studied me for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He smiled. You know what, kid? I've been doing this job long enough to spot the difference between dreamers and fighters. Most dreamers walk out of here when they see those numbers. Fighters ask what they need to do to hit them. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. There's a guy I know, a retired SEAL named Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. He runs a gym about 20 minutes from here, specializing in preparing guys for military training. If you're serious about this, and I mean dead serious, go see him. Tell him Rodriguez sent you. I took the card with trembling hands. What if my dad won't sign the consent forms? Cross that bridge when you come to it. First, prove to yourself that you can handle the physical demands. Then worry about convincing your family. The drive to Webb's gym felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. The facility was in an industrial part of town, tucked between an auto repair shop and a tire store. The sign outside simply read Apex Training in faded black letters. Through the windows, I could see people pushing massive tires, climbing ropes, and doing exercises I didn't even recognize. Marcus Webb was not what I expected. Sure, he was built like a tank. Broad shoulders, thick arms covered in tattoos, the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. But he was also soft-spoken, almost gentle in the way he greeted me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. So you're the kid Rodriguez called about, he said, extending a hand that completely engulfed mine. He said you want to be a SEAL. Yes, sir. Webb looked me up and down, not in a judgmental way, but like a mechanic assessing a broken engine. What's your reason? My why. Why do you want to be a SEAL? And don't give me some patriotic speech, or tell me you want to serve your country. Those are good reasons, but they're not usually enough to get you through the really dark moments. What's driving you? I thought about lying, giving him some noble answers about duty and honor. Instead, I told him the truth about Derek, about living in John's shadow, about being called weak. Webb listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Proving someone wrong can be powerful. Motivation, he finally said. But it's also dangerous. What happens when you prove your dad wrong? What happens when you get that SEAL trident and he finally respects you? Will that be enough? I hadn't thought about that. I don't know. That's honest. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to test you. Not physically, not yet. I'm going to test your commitment. You're going to come here every day after school for the next month. You're going to do whatever I tell you to do. No questions asked, no complaints. If you miss a single day without being hospitalized, you're done. If you quit because something hurts, or because you're tired, or because you have better things to do, you're done. At the end of the month, if you're still here, we'll talk about actually training you. What kind of test? Webb smiled, and for the first time, I saw something predatory in his expression. You'll see. Be here tomorrow at 4 p.m., sharp. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. That evening at dinner, I was unusually quiet. Derek and I still weren't speaking directly, communicating only through Mom when necessary. John had returned to base the day before, leaving behind an uncomfortable tension that seemed to fill every room. You've been gone a lot lately, Mom said, passing me the mashed potatoes. Everything okay? Just hanging out with friends, I lied, not ready to reveal my plan. Derek snorted. Friends, right. Probably more kids like you, sitting around complaining about how unfair life is. I felt the familiar surge of anger but bit my tongue. In less than 24 hours, I'd know if Webb was serious about helping me. I could wait. The next afternoon, I arrived at Apex 5 minutes early. Webb was waiting for me in the parking lot, holding a large bucket and wearing a grin that made me immediately nervous. Glad you showed up. Follow me. He led me behind the building to what could generously be called a backyard, but looked more like a construction site. There were piles of gravel, stacks of cinder blocks, and what appeared to be a small mountain of sand. See that pile of gravel? Webb pointed to a heap that was easily 6 feet high and 20 feet wide. It needs to move from here to there. He indicated a spot about 50 yards away. One bucket at a time. Fill it up, carry it over, dump it out, come back. Repeat until it's all moved. I stared at the pile, trying to calculate how many trips that would take. All of it? All of it. And Michael, this isn't a race. I don't care if it takes you 4 hours. What I care about is whether you finish. The clock starts now. The first few trips were manageable. The bucket wasn't too heavy when full, maybe 30 pounds of gravel. But by the 10th trip, my arms were burning. By the 20th, my back was screaming. By the 30th, I was questioning every decision that had led me to this moment. Webb sat in a lawn chair nearby, occasionally sipping from a water bottle, but never offering me any. He didn't speak, didn't offer encouragement or criticism. He just watched. Around trip 40, I started to break down. My hands were blistered, my shoulders felt like they were on fire, and I could barely lift the bucket. I set it down and bent over, gasping for breath. I didn't tell you to stop, Webb said quietly. I need a break. SEALs don't get breaks when things get hard. Neither do you. I wanted to quit. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to walk away, to go home, to accept that Derek was right about me being weak. But then I thought about that moment on the porch, about the look in Derek's eyes when he called me soft. I picked up the bucket and kept going. Somewhere around trip 60, something strange happened. The pain didn't go away, but it became background. Noise. My mind started to wander, and I found myself thinking about John, about all the times Derek had praised his strength and determination. For the first time, I wondered if John had ever felt this kind of doubt, this bone-deep exhaustion that made every step feel impossible. By the time I moved the last bucket of gravel, it was nearly 8 p.m. My clothes were soaked with sweat. My hands were raw and bleeding, and I could barely stand upright. But the pile was gone, relocated exactly where Webb had indicated. He walked over and inspected the new pile, nodding approvingly. Not bad for day one. Day one? Webb's grin returned. Kid, that was just the warm-up. Tomorrow we start the real work. Webb wasn't kidding about the real work. Day 2 started with what he called embrace the suck training. At 4 p.m. sharp, I found him waiting with a weighted backpack, a pair of boots that looked like they'd seen combat, and a stopwatch. Put these on, he said, handing me the boots. They were easily 2 sizes too big and felt like they weighed 10 pounds each. The pack stays on your back for the next 2 hours. We're going for a walk. The walk turned out to be a 3-mile route through the hills behind Bakersfield, carrying 40 pounds of sand in the backpack. The oversized boots made every step awkward, causing blisters within the first half mile. But Webb had made his rule clear: no complaints, no questions, just execution. You're probably wondering why I'm torturing you, Webb said as we trudged up a particularly steep incline. He wasn't even breathing hard while I sounded like a broken air conditioner. Butt-ass isn't just about physical strength. It's about mental resilience. The instructors are going to try to break you psychologically long before your body gives out. We crested the hill, and Webb stopped at a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. Take a knee. I gratefully dropped to one knee, the pack pulling me backward. Webb sat on a boulder and pulled out 2 water bottles, handing me one. Tell me about your brother, he said. The question caught me off guard. What about him? You said your dad compares you to him constantly. What's John really like? I took a long drink of water, thinking. John's everything I'm not. Strong, confident, natural leader. People just gravitate toward him. When we were kids, he'd organize these elaborate games in the neighborhood, and everyone would show up just because John asked them to. Sounds like you admire him. I do. That's what makes it so frustrating. I can't even hate him because he's genuinely a good guy. He never made me feel small. That was all Derek. Webb nodded thoughtfully. Here's something they don't teach you in school. Strength isn't just about muscle mass or how many push-ups you can do. Some of the toughest SEALs I knew were guys who looked like they'd blow away in a strong wind. But they had something else. They had overcome something significant just to get to that starting line. He stood up and shouldered his own pack. Your brother started ahead of you physically, but he's never had to fight for respect. He's never had to prove he deserved to be somewhere. That might actually work against him when things get really hard. The 3rd week of Webb's testing brought new challenges. Instead of physical tasks, he started messing with my head. He'd change the workout routine without warning, make me start over when I was almost finished, or create scenarios designed to frustrate me. Drop and give me 20 push-ups, he'd say in the middle of a run. But we're in the middle of, did I stutter? 20 push-ups now. The mental games were harder than the physical torture. At least with the gravel pile, I could see progress. With Webb's psychological warfare, I never knew what was coming next, or whether anything I did would be good enough. One afternoon, after he'd made me redo the same rope climb exercise 7 times because my form was sloppy. I finally snapped. This is bullshit, I yelled, throwing my gloves on the ground. I'm doing everything you ask and it's never good enough. What's the point? Webb didn't react to my outburst. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching me have my tantrum. You done? He asked calmly. I was breathing hard, more from anger than exertion. Yeah, I'm done with all of this. Good. Pick up your gloves and climb the rope again. Didn't you hear me? I said I'm done. Webb stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Michael, in about 6 months, when you're lying in the surf at Coronado Beach with ice-cold water washing over you, hypothermia setting in, and some instructor screaming in your face that you're a worthless piece of garbage who will never be a SEAL, you're going to have this exact same moment. You're going to want to quit, to ring that bell and make all the pain stop. He gestured toward the rope. The only difference is that here, if you quit, you can come back tomorrow and try again. There, if you quit, you're done. Forever. So what's it going to be? I stared at him for a long moment, then bent down and picked up my gloves. The rope felt different this time. Not easier, but somehow more manageable. I focused on Webb's words about that beach in Coronado, about the moment when everything would be on the line. When I reached the top and rang the small bell Webb had installed there, he was smiling. That, he said, was your first real victory. By the end of the 4th week, something had shifted in me physically. I wasn't bigger. The scale showed I'd actually lost 5 pounds. But I was definitely stronger. My shoulders had broadened slightly, and I could see definition in my arms that had never been there before. More importantly, The psychological warfare that had broken me down in week 3 now felt like just another obstacle to overcome. Webb's final test came on a Friday evening. Instead of our usual routine, he led me to his office inside the gym and sat me down across from his desk. "Congratulations," he said. "You passed." I waited for the catch, but none came. "That's it?" "That's it. You showed up every day you didn't. Quit when things got hard, and you proved you can take instruction even when you don't understand the purpose. Those are the 3 most important qualities for someone entering the military." He opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick binder. "Now we start phase 2, real training. This is a workout program specifically designed to prepare you for the Navy PST. We're going to meet 3 times a week for the next year. By the time you turn 17, you'll be ready to enlist." Looking at the detailed workout schedules, nutrition plans, and training progressions, I felt both excited and terrified. This was really happening. "There's one more thing," Webb said, his tone becoming serious. "You need to tell your parents what you're planning. Keeping secrets will only make things harder when you actually need their support." The conversation I'd been dreading couldn't be avoided forever. That Sunday, while Derek was in the garage working on his truck, I decided to approach him. My hands were shaking as I walked out there, but not from fear, from anticipation. "Derek?" I said, using his first name instead of Dad for the first time in my life. "We need to talk." He looked up from under the hood, surprised. We hadn't had a real conversation since the blow-up on the porch 6 weeks earlier. "What about?" I took a deep breath. "I want to join the Navy. Specifically, I want to become a Navy SEAL." Derek straightened up slowly, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. For a moment, his expression was unreadable. "A SEAL?" he repeated. "Michael, do you have any idea what you're talking about? Those guys they're not like regular soldiers. They're elite operators, the best of the best. I know exactly what they are, and I know what it takes to become one." Derek leaned against the truck, studying me with new eyes. Maybe it was the month of training, or maybe it was something in my voice, but he seemed to be seeing me differently. "Why?" he asked simply. This was the moment I'd rehearsed 100 times, but suddenly all my prepared speeches evaporated. Instead, I told him the truth. "Because you were right about one thing. I was weak. But you were wrong about another thing. Being weak isn't permanent. I've spent the last month learning what real strength looks like, and it has nothing to do with how much you can bench press or how fast you can run. It's about not quitting when everything inside you wants to give up." Derek was quiet for a long time, absently turning the wrench over in his hands. "The Navy SEALs," he said finally. "That's not exactly following in John's footsteps." "No," I agreed. "It's not following anyone's footsteps. It's making my own path." For the first time in months, Derek smiled at me. Not a big smile, but genuine. "When you turn 17, we'll talk about the consent forms. Until then, you better start proving you're serious about this." I couldn't help but grin. I already have been. The next 10 months transformed me in ways I never thought possible. Webb's training program was relentless but systematic. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday were strength and conditioning days. Tuesday and Thursday focused on swimming and running. Weekends were for what Webb called mental preparation, long hikes with heavy packs, obstacle courses, and scenarios designed to test decision-making under stress. My body responded faster than I'd expected. By Christmas, I'd gained 15 pounds of muscle and could knock out 50 push-ups without breaking a sweat. The scrawny kid who could barely do 10 was gone, replaced by someone who looked like they actually belonged in a gym. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what was happening mentally. The first time I beat my running goal, completing the 1.5-mile PST requirement in 10 minutes and 15 seconds, Webb actually looked surprised. Well, I'll be damned, he said, checking his stopwatch twice. 4 months ago, you couldn't run a mile without stopping. Derek noticed the changes too, though he tried not to show it. I'd catch him watching me during my morning workouts in the backyard, and occasionally he'd make small comments that weren't exactly compliments, but weren't criticisms either. You're up early again, he said one Saturday morning, finding me doing pull-ups on the bar I'd installed in the garage. Training doesn't take weekends off, I replied, dropping down from the bar. Derek picked up one of the 20-pound dumbbells I'd been using and hefted it thoughtfully. These used to be mine, you know, from when I was on active duty. I hadn't known that. Really? Yeah. Haven't touched them in years. He set the weight down and headed toward the house, then paused at the door. Keep it up, Michael. Whatever you're doing, it's working. It was the closest thing to praise he'd given me in years. The real test came in February, when Webb arranged for me to take a practice PST at a local pool. He'd invited 2 other trainers he knew, both former military, to observe and score. Me, officially. This is it, Webb said as we walked into the aquatic center. Everything we've been working toward comes down to the next hour. Are you ready? I nodded, though my stomach was churning with nerves. The pool looked enormous, and the thought of swimming 500 yards while being timed felt suddenly impossible. The swim came first. As I stood on the starting block, one of Webb's friends, a grizzled former Marine named Sergeant Miller, called out the instructions. 500 yards, any stroke, time starts when you hit the water. Minimum passing time is 12 minutes and 30 seconds. Are you ready? I dove in and immediately found my rhythm. Months of technique work with Webb had turned my flailing freestyle into something that actually resembled proper form. The first 100 yards felt easy, almost relaxing. By 200 yards, I was starting to feel the burn in my shoulders, but my breathing was controlled and my stroke remained consistent. At 300 yards, doubt crept in. My lungs were starting to protest, and my form was getting sloppy. I could hear Webb shouting encouragement from the pool deck, but his voice seemed to be coming from very far away. You've got this, Michael! Stay strong! The final 200 yards were pure torture. Every stroke felt like it might be my last, and I kept glancing at the pace clock, trying to calculate whether I was on track. With 50 yards to go, Miller called out, My time. 10 minutes, 45 seconds. Push it. I found another gear I didn't know I had. My final 50 yards were probably the fastest of the entire swim, and when I touched the wall, Miller was grinning. 11 minutes, 52 seconds. Outstanding. The push-ups and sit-ups felt almost easy after the swim. I cranked out 65 push-ups. In 2 minutes and 70 sit-ups, both well above the minimum requirements. The pull-ups were more challenging. My shoulders were fried from the swim, but I managed 12, including 2 extra just to be sure. The run was where everything came together. As I settled into my pace on the track, I felt like I was floating. My breathing was controlled, my legs felt strong, and for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about technique or form or meeting requirements. I was just running. When Miller called out my final time, 9 minutes and 47 seconds, I actually stumbled in disbelief. I'd not only passed every requirement, I'd exceeded them all by significant margins. Webb was beaming as he walked over to congratulate me. Kid, I've trained a lot of people for military service, but I've never seen someone improve this much in less than a year. You're not just ready for the Navy, you're ready for SEAL training. That evening, I sat Derek down for a conversation I'd been planning for weeks. I passed my practice PST today, I told him, handing him the score sheet Miller had filled out. All my times are well above the minimums for SEAL candidates. Derek studied the paper, his eyebrows rising as he read through the numbers. These are impressive, Michael. Really impressive. I turn 17 next month. I'd like your permission to enlist. Derek set the paper down and looked at me. really looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. The transformation wasn't just physical. Something in my posture, my voice, the way I carried myself had changed over the past year. "You know," he said slowly, "when John enlisted, I was proud of him. But I wasn't surprised. He was always going to be a soldier. It was written all over him from the time he was 12 years old." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But this is different. You chose this path not because it was easy or natural, but because you wanted to prove something to yourself. That takes a different kind of courage." Derek reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks," he said, handing it to me. It was a consent form for military enlistment, already filled out and signed. "You've already signed it?" "I signed it the day you told me about your SEAL plans. I figured if you were serious enough to make that commitment, the least I could do was be ready to support you when you proved you meant it." I stared at the form, overwhelmed. "Derek, there's something else," he interrupted. "I called John last week and told him about your training. He asked me to give you something." Derek went to his room and returned with a small box. Inside was a pair of dog tags, not John's official military tags, but a custom set he'd had made. The tags read, "Michael Patterson, future Navy SEAL, earned not given." "He wanted you to know that he's proud of you," Derek said. "And for what it's worth, so am I. I was wrong about you being weak. You're not weak. You're just a different kind of strong than John. And maybe that's exactly what the SEALs need, too." Weeks later, I walked into Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's office for the second time, but everything was different. I was different. Instead of a scrawny, desperate kid trying to prove something to his father, I was a confident young man who'd already proven something to himself. "Well, look who's back," Rodriguez said, standing up to shake my hand. "Webb called and told me about your PST scores. Damn impressive." "Thank you, sir. I'm ready to enlist." Rodriguez pulled out a stack of paperwork and began explaining the process. As he talked about job classifications and training schedules, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been sitting in this same chair, shaking with nerves and doubt. Derek's words, "You're too weak," had been echoing in my head like a curse. Now, those same words felt like a blessing in disguise. They'd pushed me to discover strength I never knew I had. "There's one more thing you should know," Rodriguez said, interrupting my thoughts. "Your ASVAB scores and PST performance put you in an elite category. If you want it, I can guarantee you a shot at the SEAL pipeline right out of boot camp. Most sailors have to serve 2 years before they even get a chance to apply." The offer should have thrilled me, but instead, I felt a strange calm. This moment, the one I'd been working toward for almost a year, suddenly felt inevitable rather than extraordinary. "Yes, sir, that's exactly what I want." As Rodriguez began processing my enlistment paperwork, I thought about calling Derek to tell him the news. For the first time in my life, I knew he'd be genuinely proud of me. Not because I was following someone else's path, but because I'd found my own. The kid who'd been crushed by his father's disappointment was gone. In his place was someone who understood that strength isn't inherited. It's earned through the decision to keep going when everything tells you to quit. Boot camp was still months away. Bud-S training was even further in the future. But sitting in that recruiter's office, signing papers that would change my life forever, I realized I'd already won the most important battle, the one against my own self-doubt. Rodriguez handed me my copies of the enlistment documents and shook my hand. "Welcome to the Navy, Patterson. Don't make me regret this." I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. "I won't, sir. I promise you that." Walking out of that office, I felt like I was floating. The parking lot looked the same. The buildings hadn't changed, but everything felt different because I was different. I wasn't the weak kid Derek had yelled at on the porch anymore. I wasn't John's little brother living in his shadow. I was Michael Patterson, future Navy SEAL. and I'd earned every letter of that title. Boot camp at Naval Recruit Training Command Great Lakes was nothing like I expected, and everything like Webb had prepared me for. The moment I stepped off the bus at 0300 hours on a freezing March morning, Petty Officer First Class Williams was in my face. "Move! Move! Move! You sorry excuses for human beings have exactly 30 seconds to grab your sea bags and form up. Anyone who doesn't make it gets to start over." The next 8 weeks blurred together in a haze of early mornings, endless drills, and psychological pressure designed to break down civilians and rebuild them as sailors. But thanks to Webb's training, I was ready for it in ways my fellow recruits weren't. While others struggled with the physical demands, I found myself helping weaker sailors during PT sessions. When Recruit Thompson from Ohio couldn't complete his pull-ups during Week 3 evaluations, I stayed after hours to coach him. "I don't get it," Thompson gasped, hanging from the bar. "You make this look easy. What's your secret?" "It's not about the exercise," I told him, adjusting his grip. "It's about your mind. Your body can do way more than you think it can. You just have to refuse to let it quit." By week 6, other recruits started looking to me for leadership during group exercises. It wasn't something I sought out, it just happened naturally. When our company was struggling with a particularly difficult drill, I found myself stepping up. "Listen up," I said during a brief break. "We're getting crushed because we're all thinking individually. SEALs work as a team because no one person can do everything alone. The same principle applies here," Petty Officer Williams noticed. After that drill, which we executed flawlessly, he pulled me aside. "Patterson, where did you learn about team dynamics?" "I've been studying SEAL training methods for over a year," Petty Officer Williams. His eyebrows rose. "SEAL training? You planning on trying out for Bud S?" "Yes, Petty Officer Williams. It's why I enlisted." Williams studied me for a long moment. "Most kids who come through here talking about being SEALs wash out during the first week of real training. They think being tough is enough, but you're different. You're not just physically prepared. You understand the mental game." He handed me a business card. "When you graduate, contact this person. Captain Sarah Mitchell runs the SEAL Candidate Preparation Program at Coronado. Tell her Williams sent you." The final weeks of boot camp flew by. Our company had transformed from a group of confused civilians into a cohesive unit, and I'd somehow become one of the unofficial leaders. When graduation day arrived, I was selected as one of the honor graduates, a distinction that came with recognition for both academic and physical excellence. Derek, Mom, and even John made the trip to Illinois for the ceremony. Seeing them in the audience as I marched across that stage was surreal. John was in his army dress uniform, Derek wore a suit I'd never seen before, and Mom was crying before the ceremony even started. After the graduation ceremony, John pulled me aside for a private conversation. "You know," he said, "when Derek first told me about your SEAL plans, I thought he was exaggerating. I figured you were going through some kind of phase, trying to prove a point." He gestured toward the ceremony program, where my name was listed among the honor graduates. "But this, Michael, this is real. You're not pretending to be tough anymore. You actually are tough." "I learned it from watching you," I admitted. "All those years when Derek was praising your leadership and determination, I was taking notes. I just had to figure out how to apply those qualities in my own way." John smiled and handed me a small wrapped package. "This is from my unit. When I told them my little brother was going to try out for the SEALs, they wanted me to give you something." Inside was a challenge coin from the 101st Airborne Division, with a personal inscription, "To future SEAL Patterson, earn your way, Echo Company, 3rd Battalion." "They don't give these to just anyone," John said. "You've got an entire company of paratroopers rooting for you now." 3 weeks later, I was standing on the beach at Coronado, California, staring at the Pacific Ocean and the infamous naval Special Warfare Center. The place looked exactly like the photos I'd studied for years. White sand beaches, obstacle courses that looked like medieval torture devices, and an atmosphere that practically radiated intensity. Captain Mitchell's office was spartanly decorated with SEAL tridents, commendation photos, and a single motivational poster that read, "The only easy day was yesterday." She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'6", but carried herself with the kind of authority that made the room feel smaller. "So you're Williams's protégé," she said, reviewing my file. "Impressive boot camp performance. But I need you to understand something before we go any further. BUDS has a roughly 75% attrition rate. Most of the people who quit are physically capable of completing the training. They quit because mentally, they can't handle the sustained pressure." She closed my file and leaned back in her chair. "Williams says you understand the mental game? Prove it. Tell me why you won't quit when things get really hard." I thought about Webb's question from over a year ago. What's your why? The answer was different now than it had been back then. A year and a half ago, I would have told you I wanted to prove my father wrong or show my brother I could be as good as him. But that's not why I'm here anymore. Captain Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" "Because somewhere, out there, there's a team that's going to need someone who refuses to quit when the mission depends on it. Someone who's been tested and proven themselves capable of pushing through when everything hurts and every instinct says to give up. I've spent 18 months learning how to be that person." She studied me for several long seconds, then smiled. "Outstanding answer. Bud S starts in 6 weeks. You'll spend that time in pre-training, getting familiar with Coronado and fine-tuning your physical conditioning. Don't get comfortable. The real test hasn't started yet." Those 6 weeks of pre-training were unlike anything I'd experienced. The physical demands were intense, but manageable thanks to Webb's preparation. What caught me off guard was the caliber of the other candidates. These weren't average military personnel. They were the top 1%, college athletes, martial arts, champions, guys who'd already proven themselves in other elite units. For the first time since starting this journey, I found myself wondering if I belonged. My roommate was a former Division I swimmer named Rodriguez, no relation to my recruiter, who'd enlisted specifically to become a SEAL. The guy next to him was Thompson, a former Army Ranger who'd completed 3 combat deployments before deciding he wanted an even bigger challenge. "What's your background?" Thompson asked during our first week. "High school graduate from Bakersfield," I said honestly. "Spent a year training with a former SEAL before enlisting." Rodriguez laughed. "That's it? Dude, half the guys here have military experience or college athletics. Are you sure you're in the right place?" The question stung because I'd been asking myself the same thing. But that night, I called Webb for the first time since enlisting. "Having second thoughts?" he asked after I explained my doubts. Not second thoughts exactly. But these guys are on a different level than what I expected. Webb was quiet for a moment. "Michael, do you remember that first day when you moved the gravel pile?" "Of course. Every single person who walked past that day thought you were crazy. A skinny kid trying to move a mountain of rocks with a bucket. But you know what? You moved that whole damn pile, one bucket at a time, not because you were the strongest or the fastest, but because you refused to quit." He paused, letting that sink in. "BUDS isn't about being the most talented person in the room. It's about being the person who's still standing when everyone else has given up. And Michael, you've already proven you're that person." The conversation reminded me of something I'd lost sight of during those intimidating first weeks. I wasn't here to compete with anyone else's achievements. I was here to prove that the skinny kid Derek had called weak could become something extraordinary through sheer determination. Bud S officially began on a Monday morning in September. As I stood in formation with 180 other candidates, listening, to Instructor Chief Petty Officer Anderson deliver his opening speech, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Gentlemen," Anderson said, his voice carrying across the beach, "look to your left, look to your right. Statistically, most of you won't be here in 6 months. This program is designed to find your breaking point and push you past it. The question isn't whether you can handle what we're going to throw at you. It's whether you can handle it and still function as part of a team." He paused, scanning the formation with eyes that seemed to look right through each of us. "Some of you are here because you think being a SEAL will make you special. You're wrong. The training doesn't make you special. It reveals whether you were special all along. Over the next 6 months, we're going to find out who you really are when everything you thought you knew about yourself gets stripped away." As we began, our first exercise, a seemingly simple 4-mile run along the beach, I thought about Derek's words from that night on the porch. "You're too weak." Maybe I had been weak back then, but weakness isn't permanent. It's just the starting point for anyone brave enough to begin the journey of becoming strong. The first phase of BUDS was called conditioning, and it lived up to its name in ways that made Webb's training look like a warm-up. Every day started at 500 with physical training that pushed us beyond anything we'd experienced. The instructors had a saying, "The only easy day was yesterday," and they proved it every single morning. By the end of week 2, our class had already lost 15 candidates. Some quit during the brutal 4-mile timed runs in soft sand. Others rang the bell, literally rang a brass bell 3 times to signal their withdrawal, during the endless sets of push-ups, sit-ups, and flutter kicks in the surf zone. The surf zone became my personal hell. Every morning, we'd wade into the Pacific Ocean and lie on our backs while ice-cold waves crashed over us. The instructors would make us perform exercises while hypothermia slowly set in, testing our ability to function despite physical misery. "Patterson." Instructor Davis screamed over the crashing waves during week 3. "You look comfortable. Drop and give me 20 push-ups in the surf." The water was so cold it felt like needles piercing my skin, but I dropped down and started cranking out push-ups while waves washed over my head. The key was staying mentally detached from the physical discomfort, something Webb had taught me during those long hill climbs with the weighted pack. "Outstanding!" Davis yelled. "Now help Johnson over there. He looks like he's about to become a quitter." Johnson was a former college football player from Texas who dominated every physical challenge until the cold water training began. He was shivering uncontrollably, his lips blue, staring at the bell on the beach with obvious longing. I crawled over to him through the surf. "Johnson, look at me. Don't look at that bell." "I can't feel my hands," he stammered. "This is insane." "Yeah, it is insane. That's the point. They're not testing whether you can do push-ups in cold water. They're testing whether you can think clearly when your body is screaming at you to quit." I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to maintain eye contact. 5 more minutes, that's all. Just 5 more minutes, and then we moved to the next evolution. Johnson nodded, and somehow we both made it through the remaining exercises. That afternoon, he pulled me aside during chow. "Thanks for talking me through that," he said. I was about to ring out. We all have moments like that. The guys who make it through are the ones who help each other when it matters most. Johnson ended up becoming one of my closest friends in the program, and that moment in the surf taught me something crucial about SEAL training. Individual physical ability only got you so far. The real test was whether you could maintain unit cohesion when everyone was at their breaking point. Week 4 brought the dreaded log PT, physical, training using massive logs that weighed over 150 pounds each. Teams of 6 men had to lift, carry, and maneuver these logs through various exercises, while the instructors screamed instructions and creative insults. "Move that log, gentlemen. Your boat crew is only as strong as your weakest member." Figure out who that is and help them. Our boat crew consisted of me, Johnson, Rodriguez the swimmer, Thompson the former ranger, a quiet guy named Martinez from New Mexico, and Williams. a former Marine who'd already completed one deployment to Afghanistan. During our first log carry exercise, a 2-mile run along the beach while carrying the log overhead, Martinez started struggling around the 1-mile mark. He was the smallest guy in our crew, maybe 150 pounds, and the weight was overwhelming him. I can't do it, Martinez gasped, his section of the log starting to slip. Yes, you can, I said, adjusting my grip to take some of his weight. Thompson, Rodriguez, shift your positions. Williams, talk to him. We reorganized on the move, redistributing the load so Martinez could maintain his grip. Williams started telling stories from his deployment, keeping Martinez's mind occupied, while his body fought to keep up. In Afghanistan, Williams said, breathing hard but keeping his voice steady, we had to carry a wounded Marine 6 miles through enemy territory. Guy weighed 220 pounds, plus gear. Know how we did it? 1 step at a time, 1 person supporting the next. We finished the exercise as a unit, but more importantly, we finished with Martinez still part of the team. That evening, Instructor Chief Anderson approached our boat crew during chow. I watched your team adjust during the log carry today, he said. Most boat crews would have let Martinez fall behind and hoped for the best. Your crew problem-solved under pressure and kept your weakest member in the fight. That's exactly what we're looking for. He paused, looking directly at me. Patterson, you're starting to show real leadership potential. Keep it up. The compliment should have made me proud, but instead, it made me nervous. Leadership in BODS meant additional scrutiny, higher expectations, and becoming a target for instructors who wanted to test your breaking point. I found out what that meant during week 5, when we began small boat operations. Each boat crew was assigned an inflatable boat small, IBS, essentially a rubber raft designed to carry 6 people through surf conditions that would challenge experienced sailors. Our first surf passage exercise was conducted in 8-foot swells during a winter storm. The goal was simple: paddle through the crashing surf, navigate to a point 500 yards offshore, and return to the beach without flipping the boat. Patterson, Instructor Davis called out as we prepared to launch. Your boat crew is going last. Everyone else will have completed the evolution before you even start. If your crew fails, everyone comes back to do it again. The pressure was enormous. 15 other boat crews had already completed their runs, and now our success or failure would determine whether 96 exhausted candidates had to repeat the exercise. As we waited for our turn, Johnson leaned over to me. No pressure, right? Actually, this is perfect, I said, watching the waves crash against the beach. We get to see how everyone else succeeded or failed. We can learn from their mistakes. I pointed to where Instructor Davis was standing. See how he's positioned? He's watching for technique, not just results. The crews that struggled tried to muscle their way through the waves. The ones that made it look easy used timing and teamwork. When our turn came, I positioned myself as the boat crew leader, the person responsible for calling commands and coordinating our paddle strokes. As we approached the surf zone, I could see a massive set of waves building. Wait, I called out. Let this set pass. We held position just beyond the breaking waves, watching 3 enormous swells crash onto the beach. The moment the third wave passed, I saw our opportunity. Go, go, go! Full power! We paddled through the calm water between sets, timing our passage perfectly. Instead of fighting against the ocean's power, we worked with its natural rhythm. The return trip was even smoother. We caught a wave and rode it back to the beach like we'd been doing surf operations for years. As we dragged our boat up onto the sand, Instructor Davis walked over with an expression I couldn't read. That, he said, was textbook small boat operations. You read the water, you waited for the right moment, and you executed flawlessly under pressure. He paused, scanning our entire boat crew. This is what teamwork looks like, gentlemen. Study it. That night, lying in my rack listening to the ocean outside our barracks, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just surviving buds anymore. I was beginning to excel at it. The scared kid who'd walked into Rodriguez's recruitment office 2 years earlier was gone, replaced by someone who could think clearly under pressure and lead others through impossible challenges. But I also knew the hardest part was still coming. Week 6 would bring Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with a total of maybe 4 hours of sleep. It was the evolution that broke more candidates than any other, and it was designed to find out who we really were when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about Derek's words one more time, "You're too weak." In less than 48 hours, I'd find out if he'd been right all along. Hell Week began at sunset on a Sunday evening with what the instructors called breakout. Without warning, explosions erupted around our barracks. Smoke grenades filled the air, machine gun blanks rattled from every direction, and instructors wearing face paint emerged from the chaos screaming orders. "Hit the deck! Hit the deck! This is not a drill!" We had 30 seconds to get into full gear and form up on the beach. Anyone who was late would be immediately dismissed from the program. As I sprinted toward the formation area, my heart pounding. From adrenaline and confusion, I caught sight of the bell gleaming in the artificial light. 3 candidates were already standing next to it, their helmets at their feet. Hell Week had claimed its first victims before it had even officially started. "Gentlemen," Instructor Chief Anderson announced once we'd formed up on the beach, "welcome to Hell Week. For the next 5.5 days, you will be in a continuous state of training. You will get approximately 4 hours of sleep total. You will be cold, wet, sandy, and miserable every moment of your existence." He paused, scanning our ranks with those penetrating eyes. "Some of you are already thinking about that bell. You're wondering if you really have what it takes. Let me save you some time. If you're asking yourself that question, you don't. Real SEALs don't wonder if they can handle it. They just handle it." The first evolution was a 4-mile beach run in full gear, followed immediately by surf immersion, then log PT, then an obstacle course run, then more surf immersion. By hour 6, the pattern became clear. There would be no breaks, no recovery time, no chance to dry off or warm up. By Monday morning, we'd lost 12 more candidates. The cold was unlike anything I'd experienced, even during Webb's worst training sessions. The Pacific Ocean in November was so frigid that simply walking into it caused immediate shock. Staying in it for hours while performing exercises felt like torture designed by someone who'd studied human limitations and decided to exceed them. "Patterson!" Instructor Davis screamed during our second surf session. "You're shivering. Are you cold?" The question was a trap. Admitting you were cold might be seen as weakness, but lying to an instructor was worse. "Instructor Davis, I'm managing the cold, Instructor Davis." Managing? Managing is for accountants. SEALs don't manage, they overcome. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups in the surf." As I performed push-ups while waves crashed over my head, I focused on Webb's voice from 2 years earlier. "Your body can do way more than you think it can. You just have to refuse to let it quit." By Tuesday afternoon, hallucinations started setting in. Sleep deprivation combined with hypothermia created a surreal state where reality became negotiable. During one log carry exercise, I was convinced. I saw Derek standing on the beach, shaking his head in disappointment. "You're not going to make it," the hallucination said. "You're too weak, just like I always told you." I blinked hard, and Derek disappeared. Johnson was looking at me with concern. "You okay, Patterson?" "You were talking to yourself." "I'm good." I lied. Just staying focused. But the hallucinations were becoming a problem for everyone. Rodriguez swore he saw his mother calling him to come home. Martinez started crying during Wednesday morning PT, convinced he'd received news that his father had died. Williams, the tough ex-Marine, began having conversations with teammates who weren't there. The instructors knew exactly what was happening, and they used it against us. "Gentlemen, some of you are starting to lose touch with reality." Instructor: Chief Anderson announced during a brief meal break on Wednesday. That's normal. Sleep deprivation and stress will do that. But here's what separates SEALs from everyone else. We function effectively even when our minds are playing tricks on us. He gestured toward the ocean, where another surf immersion session was clearly about to begin. In real operations, you might go days without sleep while conducting missions in hostile territory. If you can't handle being tired and cold during training, how are you going to perform when lives depend on your ability to think clearly? Wednesday night brought the worst evolution yet. Steel pier. We had to lie on our backs on a concrete pier while instructors sprayed us with fire hoses in near-freezing temperatures. The water pressure was so intense, it felt like being beaten with clubs, and the cold was so extreme that several candidates began showing signs of serious hypothermia. This is where we separate the men from the boys, Instructor Davis announced, over the sound of rushing water. Anyone who wants to quit, just raise your hand. We'll stop the water, get you warm clothes, and give you hot coffee. All you have to do is give up. Lying on that pier, water hammering my body, I reached my absolute breaking point. Every nerve ending was screaming. My muscles were cramping from the cold, and I could barely form coherent thoughts. The temptation to raise my hand was overwhelming. That's when I heard Johnson's voice next to me, barely audible over the sound of the water. Remember what you told me in the surf 3 weeks ago? 5 more minutes. Just 5 more minutes. I turned my head and saw him lying there, just as miserable as I was, but his eyes were determined. Martinez was on my other side, tears mixing, with the spray from the hoses, but his hands remained at his sides. Williams was beyond him, unconscious, but still in position. We were all breaking down, but we were breaking down together. Somehow, we made it through a steel pier. Somehow we made it through Thursday's endless series of boat carries, surf passages, and obstacle course runs. By Friday morning, what had started as a class of 180 candidates was down to 47. The final evolution of Hell Week was called Around the World, a 50-mile trek carrying our boats over land and through water, ending back at the beach where everything had started. We'd been awake for over 120 hours at that point, surviving on maybe 30 minutes of sleep snatched here and there during medical checks. During the final stretch, with the beach visible in the distance, Martinez collapsed. He'd been struggling for hours, but pride had kept him moving. Now his body simply refused to continue. "Leave me," he gasped as we stopped to check on him. "I'm done. I can't go another step." "Like hell," I said, grabbing one of his arms while Johnson grabbed the other. "We started this together. We finished it together." Thompson and Rodriguez adjusted their positions to carry more of the boat's weight, while Williams took Martinez's pack. As a boat crew, we covered that final mile carrying one of our own. When we finally reached the beach, Instructor Chief Anderson was waiting with a smile I'd never seen before. "Gentlemen," he said, "welcome to the Brotherhood. You have successfully completed Hell Week." The words didn't register immediately. We stood there, swaying on our feet, too exhausted to celebrate. Then Anderson continued, "Look around you. 47. Men started Sunday evening. All 47 of you are still here. That has never happened before in the history of Bud S. Not one person from your class quit during Hell Week." The achievement was unprecedented, but I was too tired to fully comprehend what it meant. All I knew was that we'd survived something that had seemed impossible. After 72 hours of recovery sleep, I was finally coherent enough to make phone calls. Derek answered on the first ring. "Michael? How did it go?" "I completed Hell Week, Derek. Our entire class made it through." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard something I'd never heard before. Derek crying. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you being weak. What you just accomplished. Most grown men couldn't do that." "Derek, I need to tell you something. Remember that night when you said I was too weak to join the military like John?" Michael, I was angry and— No, let me finish. Those words changed my life. They pushed me to become someone I never thought I could be. If you hadn't said them, I might have stayed comfortable being the kid who read books and avoided challenges. So, thank you. Derek was quiet for a long moment. John told me something similar when he called last week. He said adversity reveals character. It doesn't build it. Maybe you were always strong, and you just needed someone to challenge you to prove it. 3 months later, I graduated from Buddhist as part of Class 289. Of the 180 men who had started the program, 23 of us received our SEAL tridents. The graduation ceremony was held on the same beach where Hell Week had nearly broken us. Derek, Mom, and John were all there, sitting in the front row as I walked across the stage. When Captain Mitchell pinned the SEAL trident to my uniform, she leaned in close. "Outstanding work, Petty Officer Patterson. You've earned this." As I shook her hand, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 2.5 years earlier, I'd been a scared, skinny kid sitting in a recruiter's office, desperate to prove I wasn't weak. Now I was a Navy SEAL, part of the most elite fighting force in the world. But the real victory wasn't the trident on my chest. It was the knowledge that I'd faced my deepest fears and limitations and pushed through them. I'd learned that strength isn't about how much you can lift or how fast you can run. It's about your refusal to quit when everything inside you wants to give up. After the ceremony, Derek approached me with a small wrapped package. "This belonged to my father," he said, handing it to me. "He served in Korea, earned a Bronze Star for valor. I was going to give it to John, but I think you've earned it more." Inside was a simple military compass, worn from decades of use. The inscription read, "True North, Grandpa Patterson, Korean War veteran." "Your grandfather would have been proud," Derek said. "He always said that real courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite being afraid. That's what you did, Michael? You felt the fear and did it anyway?" John stepped forward and wrapped me in a bear hug. "Little brother, you've officially surpassed anything I've ever accomplished. Army Rangers are tough, but Navy SEALs are legendary." He stepped back and saluted me, something he'd never done before. "It's an honor to serve in the same military as you." That evening, we had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Pacific. As I sat there with my family, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and gold, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The bell that had tempted so many candidates to quit was visible in the distance, gleaming in the evening light. It no longer represented failure to me. Instead, it represented a choice. The choice between comfort and growth, between giving up and pushing through. Derek raised his glass for a toast. "To Michael Patterson, Navy SEAL, the strongest person I know." As we clinked glasses, I thought about all the people who had helped me reach this moment. Webb, who taught me that strength could be developed. Rodriguez, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Johnson, Martinez, and the rest of my boat crew, who proved that individuals achieve extraordinary things by supporting each other. But mostly, I thought about that scared 16-year-old kid who'd been told he was too weak to follow in his brother's footsteps. He'd been right about one thing. He couldn't follow John's path. But he'd been wrong about everything else. He wasn't too weak to serve. He was strong enough to forge his own path, to become something even more challenging than what his brother had achieved. He just had to be willing to endure the process of discovering who he really was when tested beyond all reasonable limits. The SEAL trident on my chest wasn't just a symbol of military achievement. It was proof that weakness is temporary, that strength can be earned, and that the most important battles are the ones you fight against your own limitations. Derek had been wrong when he called me weak. But in a strange way, he'd also been right. I had been weak enough to let other people's opinions define what I thought was possible. Now I know better. Real strength isn't inherited or given. It's earned through the decision to keep Going when everything tells you to quit, and once you've earned it, no one can ever take it away from you. As we walked back to the hotel that night, Derek put his arm around my shoulder, something he hadn't done since I was a small child. "You know," he said, "I spent years trying to make you more like John. I'm glad I failed. The world needs more people like you, Michael. People who prove that strength comes in different forms." I looked back at the beach one last time, at the place where I'd discovered who I really was when pushed beyond my breaking point. Tomorrow, I'd begin the next phase of my SEAL training. There would be new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to prove myself. But tonight, I was simply Michael Patterson, Navy SEAL. The kid who'd been called too weak to serve his country, who'd just completed one of the most demanding military training programs in the world, and for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. 6 months after graduation, I received my first operational assignment with SEAL Team 7, based out of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The transition from training to real-world operations was jarring in ways I hadn't expected. During BUD-S, every challenge had a clear beginning and end. In the teams, uncertainty became a constant companion. My first deployment took us to Afghanistan, where the lessons learned during Hell Week proved invaluable in ways I couldn't have imagined. The sleep deprivation, the mental stress, the need to function effectively while physically miserable, all of it translated directly to combat operations in hostile territory. During my 3rd month in country, our team was tasked with a high-risk extraction mission in the mountains near Kandahar. Intelligence indicated that a captured Army helicopter pilot was being held by insurgents in a remote compound. The mission required a 12-mile hike through treacherous terrain, carrying full combat loads, followed by a complex assault on a fortified position. As we approached the target compound at 0200 hours, I found myself thinking about Martinez and how we'd carried him during the final stretch of Hell Week. The pilot we were rescuing, Staff Sergeant David Chen, was unconscious and badly injured when we reached him. Without hesitation, I volunteered to carry him during our extraction. "Patterson, you sure about this?" asked Senior Chief Reynolds, our team leader. "He's dead weight, and we've got 8 miles of rough terrain between us and the extraction point." I looked at Chen, remembering every moment when my boat crew had refused to leave me behind during the darkest parts of training. "We don't leave people behind, Senior Chief. That's what makes us different." The extraction took 4 hours. Chen regained consciousness halfway through the hike and tried to walk on his own, but his injuries were too severe. For the final 4 miles, our entire team rotated carrying him, just like we'd learned to do with that log during BUD-S. When we finally reached the helicopter landing zone, Chen grabbed my arm as the medics loaded him onto the stretcher. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "I heard you arguing with your team leader about carrying me. You could have left me there." "No," I said, "we couldn't have. That's not who we are." 3 weeks later, I received a message through military channels that Chen had made a full recovery and returned to flight status. He'd asked his commanding officer to track down the SEAL, who'd carried him during the extraction. The message was simple: "You saved my life. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." That deployment changed my perspective on what it meant to be a SEAL. The physical challenges of BUD-S had been preparation, but the real test was whether you could maintain your values and protect others when lives hung in the balance. When I returned from Afghanistan, I found a letter waiting for me from Webb. He'd been following my career through mutual contacts and wanted to congratulate me on a successful deployment. But the letter contained something unexpected, an invitation to help train the next generation of SEAL candidates. "Michael," he wrote, "you've proven that strength can be developed in anyone willing to do the work. Now it's time to pay that forward. There are kids out there just like you were, convinced they're not good enough, but with the potential to become something extraordinary. Help me find them." The opportunity to mentor future SEALs appealed to me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Working with Webb's civilian training program during my off-duty time, I encountered dozens of young men and women who reminded me of my younger self. One candidate in particular stood out, a 19-year-old named Sarah Mitchell, no relation, to Captain Mitchell, who'd grown up in foster care and was convinced she wasn't tough enough for military service. She was small, maybe 5'3" and 115 pounds, but she had something I recognized immediately: the hunger to prove she was more than what people expected. "I know I don't look like SEAL material," Sarah said during our first meeting, "but I've been reading about the program and I think I can handle it." "What makes you think that?" I asked, remembering Rodriguez's skeptical questions from years earlier. "Because I've been handling impossible things my whole life. I aged out of foster care at 18 with nowhere to go and no family support. I worked 3 jobs while finishing high school and still graduated with a 3.8 GPA. If I can do that, I can handle Bud-S." Sarah's confidence reminded me of my own desperation to prove Derek wrong, but her motivation was different. She wasn't trying to earn someone's respect. She was trying to earn her own. Over the following months, I watched Sarah transform herself through the same systematic approach that Webb had used with me. The physical changes were dramatic, but the mental evolution was even more impressive. She developed the kind of unshakable determination that I'd seen in only the most elite operators. When Sarah shipped out to Bud-S 18 months later, I felt the same pride that Webb must have experienced watching me succeed. She completed the program as one of the first female SEAL candidates, earning her trident through the same grueling process that had tested generations of warriors before her. The success stories accumulated over the years. Former gang members who used military discipline to redirect their lives. College athletes who discovered that mental toughness mattered more than physical ability. Kids from broken homes who found family and purpose in the brotherhood of special operations. Each success reinforced the lesson I'd learned that night on Derek's porch. Weakness is not permanent. It's just the starting point for anyone brave enough to begin the journey toward strength. 10 years after graduating from Bud-S, I was promoted to Senior Chief Petty Officer and assigned as an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Coming full circle to train the next generation of SEALs felt like destiny. On my first day as an instructor, I stood on the same beach where I'd nearly quit during Hell Week, looking out at a new class of eager candidates. Among them was a young man who looked remarkably like I had at 17, small, nervous, but determined to prove himself. During the initial briefing, I shared something that had taken me years to understand fully. "Gentlemen and ladies," I said, scanning the formation, "you're here because you believe you have what it takes to become Navy SEALs. Some of you are probably right, others are probably wrong. But here's what I want you to understand. Your current physical abilities don't determine your potential for success." I paused, remembering my own first day in Instructor Chief Anderson's intimidating speech. The candidates who succeed aren't necessarily the strongest or the fastest when they start. They're the ones who refuse to accept limitations as permanent. They're the ones who understand that every moment of suffering during training is making them stronger for the real challenges they'll face as operators. After the briefing, the nervous-looking candidate approached me. "Senior Chief Patterson, I'm Seaman Recruit Tommy Rodriguez. I wanted to ask, do you think someone my size can really make it through this program?" The question transported me back to my own desperate conversation with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Years earlier. I looked at Tommy, maybe 5'6" and 140 pounds, and saw myself. "Rodriguez," I said, "let me tell you something about size. The smallest man in my Buds class was also the one who never quit, never complained, and always helped his teammates when they were struggling. Physical strength matters, but mental strength matters more." I gestured toward the obstacle course, where candidates were already beginning their training. "Your job isn't to be the biggest or strongest person here. Your job is to be the person who's still standing when everyone else has given up. Can you do that?" Tommy straightened his shoulders, and I saw something familiar spark in his eyes. Yes, Senior Chief. I can do that. Watching him walk towards the training area, I thought about the incredible journey that had brought me to this moment. From the scared kid who'd been called too weak, to the SEAL instructor helping others discover their own strength. That evening, I called Derek to tell him about my new assignment. At 72, he'd mellowed considerably, but he still carried himself with the pride of a veteran. Dad, I said, using the word that had taken years to feel natural again, I'm going to be training the next generation of SEALs. Thought you'd want to know. Michael, he said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. There's something I need to tell you. When you graduated from Bud S 10 years ago, it was the proudest moment of my life. Not because you proved me wrong, but because you proved something much more important. What's that? You proved that strength isn't inherited, it's chosen. Every day you choose to be stronger than you were the day before. That's not something I could have taught you or given you. That's something you had to discover for yourself. Derek paused, and when he continued, his voice was thick with pride and regret. I spent so many years comparing you to John, thinking that was the only way to motivate you. But you didn't need to be like John. You need to become the best version of yourself. And Michael, the man you've become, is extraordinary. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the journey from weakness to strength had been about much more than earning a SEAL trident or proving Derek wrong. It was about discovering that our limitations are usually self-imposed, and that extraordinary achievements become possible when we refuse to accept those limitations as permanent. The scared 16-year-old who'd walked into a recruitment office 3 years after being called too weak had become someone who could now help others make the same transformation. That progression from student to teacher, from candidate to instructor, represented the true measure of growth. Standing on my apartment balcony that night, looking out at the Pacific Ocean where I'd endured Hell Week and countless training evolutions, I understood something that had eluded me for years. Derek had been right when he called me weak. But he'd been wrong about what that meant. Weakness isn't a character flaw or a permanent limitation. It's simply the recognition that you have room to grow. The strongest people I'd known, the elite operators, the inspirational leaders, the individuals who achieved seemingly impossible things, had all started from a place of acknowledged weakness. They'd just been willing to do the work necessary to transform that weakness into strength. Tomorrow, I will begin the process of helping a new group of candidates discover their own capacity for transformation. Some would succeed, others would fail, but all of them would learn something valuable about themselves in the process. The bell that had tempted so many to quit would still be there, gleaming in the California sunshine, representing the choice between comfort and growth. But now I understand its true purpose, not to encourage failure, but to make success that much more meaningful for those who chose to endure. The journey from weakness to strength never really ends. It just evolves into the opportunity to help others begin their own transformation. And in that continuation, in that paying forward the lessons learned through suffering and perseverance, the real value of the struggle reveals itself. I was no longer the kid trying to prove he wasn't weak. I was the man helping others discover that they're stronger than they ever imagined possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.